Morning, friends. I swear that flying this little model helicopter that we use to make our films, we've only had it for about 6 months. Well, the new one, after crashing it in Israel and getting a new one, and it always gets us into trouble. It's kind of like dating a supermodel, I guess. It's got its payoffs and you get beautiful pictures from it, but it's very tough to manage. And I'm thinking of a time where it actually got us arrested. Some of our crew arrested. We were making a film. I'm not a jailbird, it's okay. But we were making a film in India. And we were going there because you may know that the Apostle Thomas, after he had stuck his fingers in the wounds, or at least been offered the privilege of doing that, went off to India, among other places, and took the gospel to the subcontinent, right? They also say that he probably went across to China for a while and preached there in between trips through India. And I didn't realize this, but you can go to the places where he first set up those 7 churches in Kerala, and then went across also to Chennai and did some ministry as well and set up big churches. That's how Christianity got to India. So we were going to those places, and part of the fun of the film, we got ourselves an old Hindustan ambassador taxi. We kind of went a bit Top Gear, I guess, for a minute here, and we just thought, right, we're going to make this film about driving through India in a 20-year-old rubbish car with all the madness of the traffic of India. And on the way, of course, we're going to look at the Thomas sites and look at the reasons that would make an intelligent person believe in the resurrection today. Would you really believe that, that as a matter of real history and science, a dead guy came back to life 2,000 years ago? Could you really believe that? What kind of historical evidence would you expect? And so on. And so we do all that. And on the way, we got to a place called Fort Cochin, down in Kerala on the coast. And this is the spice area of India. Still, spice is one of its major export incomes of that economy. And a lot of it goes out of the city of Cochin. There's these great big Chinese cranes there now. But back in the time of the apostles, and well before, the spice trade was going on out of India. Seems obvious, right? Who in the Bible is recorded as being a very early trader in spice? Yeah, King Solomon. So you're talking about 900 and something BC. And if you go to the little synagogue there in Cochin, they'll tell you that there's been a Jewish community there since about 900, they think, BC, right? That's really old. And so we were kind of nosing around there, and there's this beautiful harbour in Cochin, and we were going to get a shot of the old car on a ferry, this gorgeous old ferry clunking across Cochin Harbour. And so we put the copter up to try and film out the 2 presenters, Marcus and me, going across on the ferry. And there's no department of the Indian government that you can go to and say, can I please have permission to fly my helicopter across one of your harbours? What? There's just not. In fact, that's true of most countries. So we just did it on the principle of it's easier to get forgiveness than permission. And you've got to be a bit like that sometimes to get things done in some of these countries. And so we did it. And my wife, who'd come on this trip, that amazing woman, she comes on all the tough trips to help out. She never comes on the easy glamour trips like the cruise to Antarctica. She comes on the hard yakka trips, and I just got to respect that. I've invited her on other ones. She goes, oh, no, you don't really need me. You can save the money, blah, blah, blah. So I'm like, okay, yep, can't argue. And but she came on this one, and she and the 2 crew went into this abandoned building right by Cochin Harbour, and they launched the copter. And it's a pretty big beast, and it makes a lot of noise as it takes off. It's very hard to be alone in India, a nation of 1-point-something billion people. And so about 100 eyes saw the copter take off, and they all talked to others. And by the time they came back in to land it, they got the shots of us flying across the harbour, and they came back in to land the thing. And then they heard this voice behind them of the police saying, "Hey, you can't do that, you're under arrest, stop." And they're like, oh no, this is not good. And so I'm on the walkie-talkie on the other side of the harbour. I'm saying to them, all good guys, we're about to come back. Guys. And eventually I get this, a few minutes later I get this this kind of quick message. Gren, we've been arrested, we're in the back of a paddy wagon, they don't know we've got the radio, but as soon as they do they're going to take it off and... Okay, good, fantastic, yeah, have a nice day. See you in a few weeks, yeah. And so I got straight back on the ferry and flew back, zoomed back over in the clunky old car, up to the police station, walked in, and there's my lovely wife, and my two good friends, the crew, behind bars. It's really good teasing potential, I tell you. If ever she, says, you really shouldn't, who are you to talk? Jailbird. Yeah. Anyway, so she wasn't funny at the time. And to cut a long story short, they said to us, I said, what's the problem? And they said, you're Pakistani spies. I'm like, no, I go for a different cricket team than that. Definitely not Pakistani, but thanks for, the suggestion. And they said, oh no, but you've been filming. And it turns out it was right near their big naval base. And so they thought we were doing espionage with our copter. And all sorts of accusations were made, and it was getting pretty nasty for a minute there. It was looking like some hard time might be served, certainly overnight in the cells and that kind of stuff. And we're going, we're just a Christian crew here making a film about the history of St. Thomas. Oh, but that's what you say, and it got pretty ugly. And I'm praying, we're all praying our heads off. And then two things happened. Number one, the arresting officer lied. And the question came, and they said, have you got any footage? And we said, well, you ask the arresting officer who arrested us. The truth, the completely disclosing answer would have been, yes, we do, and my wife has hidden it in a bra, the chip. But the answer we gave was, well, you ask the officer who arrested us. And the superior officer said to him, were they out of your sight for any time? And he didn't want to tell the truth, because the truth was, yes, he did let them out of our sight. And in that 30 seconds, my wife went, grabbed the card, stuck it in her clothing, and the rest is history. But he didn't want to say, yes, I let them out of my sight, because he would have looked like he'd failed on the job, which he had. And we were going to take advantage of that for all that we could. And the second thing that happened was, the old pastor who was helping us, a wise old Christian gentleman, a local Indian pastor, got on the phone and he started phoning some friends. I didn't know what he was doing. The next second, the deputy state whatever arrives, I've forgotten his rank, but big, high, a guy in the Indian police force, and he says, could you come outside, Mr. Kent? Going, this could be good or this could be bad, but okay. And he says to me, are you a Christian? I'm thinking, this could be good or not. I said, yes, I am. He said, are you a minister? Thinking, oh, now I'm embarrassed. You've just arrested a minister. That's a great look. I said, yes, I am. And he said, did you go to an Adventist school about 3 weeks ago and tell a story about a dog? And I go, yes. And he says, my two daughters really enjoyed it. I'm going, did they? That's very good. I'm glad it was a good story for them. That's great. And he said, no, in a couple of hours, you'll be out of here. The Navy wants to come and investigate you, and there'll be a whole lot of other things, but I'll be here, and I know who you are, and it'll all be fine. And so we were, and we got out. And we've still got the footage, and it actually looks really good. People don't know the hassle that you go to make a film. That whole day of stress produced about 30 seconds of footage that you're going to see in the film. Right? That's the kind of effort that you go to. But when those kind of things happen, we kind of have this joke, all right, the invisible producer is working for us, And we get that sense of God, despite our blunders at times, despite our sometimes foolishness, we get a sense of big hands across our project. Let me tell you a tiny bit about it. One of the first episodes looks at childbirth and the bloody beauty of it. The incredible, it reminds me, I can only compare it to the cross, kind of a bloody and violent event that produces life, and it's gorgeous in a gory way because of that. And we look at some of the technology, if I can put it that way, of the human body that produces life and another person. And my wife, bless that woman, allowed 6 cameras into the birth room. Carefully shot, carefully edited, nothing scary, but that's a pretty big commitment. And we look at, you guessed it, how those amazing little torpedoes are powered. And I had no idea that sperm don't just swim under their own steam, that actually the woman's body assists in their transport, big time. And what blew me away was when I had a bit of a look at cilia, the little hairs that seem to propel the sperm and also then the fertilized egg around inside the woman's body. Now, there are people here who know a lot more about this than I do, but my understanding is that those are just amazing little pieces of nanotechnology. You call them hairs, right? And there are bazillions of them in the body. and they kind of swim. Now, the first thing about them is, you wouldn't think I'd be an expert on hairs, but hear me out here. The first thing to say about them is that they all beat in the right way. And if they all went like together like windscreen wipers, nothing would move. If they all just fired off at random, it'd just cause chaos and the egg would be, who knows where it would go. But instead they fire off in what you call a metachronal rhythm. Or to put it in terms I get, a Mexican wave. So those hairs over there go rah and jump up and it drifts across the crowd, and the egg kind of surfs on that, crowd surfs across the top and gets to the other side. And if you zoom in on these little hairs, they've got about 66 different protein parts. They're like a city building. They have a kind of a lift shaft, which takes constituent parts up when they need to get longer and pulls them down. They have a special I think it's a protein that kind of acts like a demolition worker and pulls the bits apart and then shoves them back down the lift well to be used elsewhere in the body. It's just a hair, and it's got incredible technology built into it. And you look at the little kind of protein machines that these things are made of, and you just say, unbelievable. They're powered by things in their roots that make them move. But what coordinates them? And does that sound to you like a product of chance? Or does it sound like unbelievable suggestion of design? And the more you look into the technology of childbirth, and you talk to someone like this, recently voted the most popular professor in the United States. He's an Adventist. He's a recent creationist. He has no problem wearing that hat in his elite academic kind of role over there. And that's, when you talk to people like this, you talk to P.Z. Myers, the leading atheist embryologist, and he says, oh, it's all just luck and there's nothing special about human beings and so on. And you just go, I just defy that kind of stuff just defies the odds. Yes, it's theoretically possible, but unbelievably improbable that kind of stuff would develop by chance. And that's really the point that we make. Astronomical, you've seen that one on our first day. Then we go to Antarctica. That was the fun one. And we actually just look at the chemistry of water and talk about what an amazing thing boring old water is for all life. Some of you will have seen the Albatross film. That's online. If you haven't, bigquestions.com. It's up at the moment. Monkeys wrote this. We look at what we talked about yesterday, basically, the idea that DNA arose by chance is about as likely as monkeys writing Shakespeare. And we talked to this gentleman, John Sanford. Some of you might have read his book. He's a controversial geneticist. He starts out as a good old off-the-rack scientific atheist, just because that's what you do. And then he starts studying DNA. In fact, he's the guy who invented the gene gun, which is behind all early genetic engineering. Now, whatever you may think of genetic engineering, certainly that guy knows a lot about genes and has made ridiculous amounts of money out of inventing the first genetic, engineering technology. And while he's doing this, he's looking at DNA and he's going, that's a language. It's a chemical language. And a language infers intelligence. And this scientific atheist starts looking for an intelligence behind the universe. He knows a bunch of Christians. He goes along and talks to them, and fortunately they're people who are able to explain their faith, not just in simple, close your eyes and believe kind of terms, but they're actually able to give a reason for the faith that they have, and they're scientifically credible. And he comes to believe in Christ. Great. And he's still probably a theistic evolutionist at that time. Certainly an ancient creationist, believes that it's all very, very old and it would have taken ages for it all to... But then he starts with looking at the genetics of populations. And he writes this piece of software called Mendel's Accountant. And it's kind of a nerdy joke, but Mendel was the first guy really to tinker around with genes. He grew flowers and he kind of knew a bit about why does a red one and a white one make some bit of one red one and blah, blah, blah. How does it all work? And Mendel, and what it does is it tries to count the concentrations of genes in populations, to put it simply. That's what it really does. It looks at the concentrations of different alleles and things in a genetic population and looks at genetic drift and that kind of stuff. And he looks at that and he kind of is hit by the fact that the human gene pool seems to be actually getting worse. What seems to be happening is we're getting bombarded by radiation. And if there weren't these little molecules that run around editing everything, editing our DNA, it would be knocked around even worse than it is. And there's these I don't know much about this. I'm just fumbling around. I did a bit of genetics at uni, but that's about as much as I know. But he'll describe how your DNA, if you think of your DNA as a sentence, right, a chemical sentence, the quick red fox jumps over the lazy brown dog. Great. But a piece of bombardment knocks out one of those letters and replaces it with something wrong. And along comes a little editing molecule and goes, oh, that's a spelling mistake. And spelling mistakes in DNA are not just going to get you low marks, they're going to get you dead or seriously injured in most cases, seriously, have a deleterious effect in most cases. And so this thing comes along and goes, oh, and corrects your spelling. But just think of the quasi-intelligence required to do that. How does it know how you're spelled? It's crazy stuff. And he's looking at this, and he actually comes out the other end of that, and he calculates it with his Mendel's accountant software. And he comes to the conclusion that the human race can't be much more than about 10 or so thousand years old. In other words, he thinks his own way into becoming a recent creationist, based on evidence he finds in the genes. Now, I know there's lots of questions in that area. I'm not saying that one thing definitely proves it, but it's pretty encouraging to me as somebody who takes the biblical paradigm, as I understand it, that here's a guy who got there independently. He didn't get that from his Christian friends because they're not recent creationists, but he got there based on his own research. Fascinating kind of dude. And he was a lovely Christian. He had us in his home for a day. We interviewed him. That'll be in that ep. This is what I was talking about yesterday. And I've got to tell you, I've got mixed feedback from yesterday's meeting. Some people said, yeah, loved it, great. Other people said, what on earth were you talking about for half the time? Why didn't you just preach the Bible? And fair question. There was some pretty complex stuff there. What we're really trying to say by that ep is this. You're way better than the best robot. Your intelligence that you carry around in your head is far superior to anything artificial intelligence can yet produce, and according to many top researchers, will ever be able to produce because of a thing called the hard problem of consciousness. We don't know what it is, we don't know how to replicate it, we don't even know how to describe it properly in scientific terms, and we certainly don't know the physical mechanisms that produce it. And that's the big challenge. And so we went and met these top artificial, that's my metal girlfriend there. I wore her favourite perfume, WD-40, but just didn't happen for me. Her heart stayed cold. Yep. And you talk to this man about the processes of the brain. Now there's a neurosurgeon at the top of his game, but he'll tell you we know 1/100th of what's going on between our ears. Then we look at the episode. This is what we're going to talk about today. Why should I care? It's looking at morality. Do you think that thing's going to be moral? Do you think that creature is going to love its neighbours? Well, it'll love them as protein, but do you think it's really going to love them? We talk about this guy as well, as you'll hear. We get on a train and go all across Mongolia and muck about. We go to Thailand and look at some of the issues up there with child trafficking, and I'll tell you why that makes sense in a minute. Then we look at suffering. I don't know about you, but I find the biggest reason people give for not believing in a kind God is suffering. And so we try to look at that. And we go, what I did for this film, I just looked at my two worst fears. My two worst fears. One would be living in absolute abject poverty with little chance of getting out. So we went to one of the worst slums in Africa and talked to people there. It's one of the most religious places on the planet, interestingly. And the other thing would be not just being sick myself, but actually having a child suffer and be severely handicapped. So I went and talked to a dear old college mate of mine. Some of you will know Louise. She's recently written actually in Science magazine an article about her son Kevin and his challenges. Great kid, and he's got 3 massive handicaps. And we spend a week with them and say to ourselves, does this disprove a loving God? Or does this kind of suffering scream out for there to be a kind Father who fixes it one day? And we try to ask that question honestly. Look at the Jerusalem map. You saw that a little trailer of that yesterday. Yeah, that's in Iran. Man, we had fun in Iran. I don't know if you think Iranians are a bunch of fundamentalist tea-towel heads, but all the people that we met over there were unbelievably friendly. It's one of the friendliest countries I've ever been to. I've got to tell you, I was impressed with Islam too. I know it's got an ugly face in the media, but there's a lot of sincere people over there who want to worship God as they understand Him. And I would love not to attack that. I'd love to build on that. They already have a respect for Jesus. Their holy book already teaches that Jesus is coming back to judge the world. That's a pretty good start. And I'd love to see us be much more embracing and inclusive and friendly in the way that we reach out to those guys. When you see it from their point of view, the West, which they think is Christian, has bombed them and messed around in their government policy just to get their hands on their incredible oil resources. And they hate it. They think if George W. Bush represents Jesus, well then, blah. And that's kind of the common thinking. And we've got a few stereotypes about us in their media that we need to overcome. And what blew me away was their willingness to talk to me and to be friendly and to be able to communicate those ideas and really hear each other in the few little conversations that we have. I want to go back there for a holiday and take a whole pocket load of USBs full of these films and show it to them, because so far in this film series, the Muslims are right with us, right? Right up until we start talking about Jesus, then there'll be some different views, and that's fine. That can be done politely. But all the arguments for monotheism and belief in God, they'll appreciate. I've screened some of these films to them, and they kind of go, great, yeah, okay, good. You know, we agree with you. Thanks for giving us more reason to believe in a God. And so that's kind of a quiet wish that I have for them. Is Jesus history? We look at the historical evidence for Jesus, and then the Doubting Thomas India episode, which I was briefly talking about. Here are two inspired comments that have kind of powered us in our thinking through this. 1 Peter 3, one of my favourite texts. Always be prepared, he says, to give an answer or a reason. The Greek word is apologia, a logical case, a reasoned argument in favour of something, to everyone who asks you the reason for the hope that you have. We could unpack that. It assumes that people are asking you, why do you have hope? And so they're seeing that hope in your life. It also means you've got to prepare. There's a bit of hard work there, studying out the reasons why and the evidences for God and Christ and belief. And it says, do this with humility and respect. Too often it turns into an argument, right? And that's pretty unproductive. I think Peter's telling us there, if it's not just friendly interchange between two people, it's probably not producing any fruit. It's not about debating and proving the other side to be idiots. It's about building on the things that God is doing in each human heart and trying to take that up a level. And here's another one. The book Evangelism. In the cities of today, where there is so much to attract and to please, spot on, the people can be interested by no ordinary efforts. Ministers will find it necessary to put forth extraordinary efforts in order to arrest the attention of the multitudes. They must make use of every means that can possibly be devised for making the truth stand out clearly and distinctly. I just think she's so onto it there. Because you've got to entertain, you've got to grab attention first thing, and then try to make the truth clear as a bell for people and let them think about it, let them decide. So that's what we're fumbling around and trying to do. So to today, can we be moral without God? I want to ask that question. And let me just ask by saying, I think I know what most of you will say in this tent, but let me just ask the question anyway. Are there moral facts or just moral opinions? Who thinks there are moral facts? There are moral truths, hard morals that can't change. Okay, that's about half. Who thinks that this is a trick question? You don't want to put your hand up yet. Okay. Who thinks that there are just moral opinions, that morality is just a matter of your opinion or my opinion? You're welcome to put that view. You might be a postmodern person and think that. That's kind of, in a way, the central question. Do you think there's such a thing as a moral fact or only a moral opinion? To put it another way, are there objective moral truths that stand up all through time, or just personal preferences? Because if you say, yes, there are moral facts, and most Christians will say that, most Jews, most Muslims, most Hindus, yes, then you're a moral realist. You think morals are real. Or you're a moral objectivist. You think morals are objective. Okay? If you said no, you're a moral relativist. You think morality is relative, and it depends what you believe and what you think and what's right for you, and that might be different from what's right for me. Okay, so you're one of those two things. Or a moral skeptic. You're skeptical about there being any kind of morality. Now, as we heard yesterday, some of the new atheists are moral skeptics because they know where this argument's going. And they'll say, well, you know, there can be moral truths, not really. It's really just a matter of opinion. You think it's wrong to do this, I think it's wrong to do that. Different cultures have different views. Who can say who's right? And that's the way they argue. Okay? And I normally, when someone says that to me, I normally try and and argue at the extremes. I normally try and pick an obvious extreme case, because we could always argue over whether it's right to kill animals for food or not, or whether they suffer, blah, blah, blah. That's in a way, that's debatable. But there are some things I'd argue that are not debatable, and I just try and choose an extreme one. What if I have a hobby of causing animal suffering just for fun? What if I like taking a blowtorch down to the beach and frying little fairy penguins? Could that be okay? And most people say, oh, you're a sick freak. I'd say, yeah, good, that's lucky I'm just making that one up, right? But if that were my hobby, would you say, well, that's right for you, but it's not right for me? Is that all you'd want to say? You'd want to say more than that. If my hobby was getting on a Qantas flight to Thailand and, God forbid, being a child sex tourist, as a number of Australians do up there, or some other places in the Pacific or Africa that are known for those kind of hotels where you can buy a child for $80 for a night and do whatever you want to them, God help us. Would you say to me, oh, well, that's your moral view and good for you, I don't agree, but if you're a moral relativist, the best you can say is, I don't agree with that moral preference, but you've got no way of telling me that I'm a sick freak. You can say, in my opinion, you're a sick freak, but that's not very politically correct, right? You're meant to tolerate, right? Except the problem is some things are intolerable. I think I'm a big fan of tolerance, but some things are intolerable. You're meant to be non-judgmental. If you're judgmental, you get judged for it, right? Even Jesus said that. But there are some things that should be judged, that cry out for justice and for judgment. And I think we have international police forces because we believe that. And there are some things that are just wrong in any culture. I did an interview with a child protection worker up in Thailand. And she said a lot of sex tourists get off the plane and they think, well, this is okay in this culture. It's illegal where I come from, but it's acceptable here, which is not true. But what kind of weird thinking is that? As though morality would change from one continent to another. Or people will say, well, it was acceptable in Roman times, you know, to monkey with kids. The Romans did it and put it on their vases and in their artwork, and that makes it okay. Does it? I think there are some morals that just stretch across all times and all cultures are just wrong. Messing with a kid in that way is just wrong and sick. And if you don't think it is, go and seek professional help because you're sick and you're twisted. Unarguable. Not going to have that debate. Having said that, I was in the UK recently and picked up the papers, and blow me down, some top sociology professors are up there arguing that, well, it could be okay under certain circumstances and stuff like this. And you just go, you guys just need to be sacked. You're just absolutely out of your brain. Okay, there are some things that I think make morals stand out right and wrong. And if we just there found a moral absolute, then maybe there's some more. And maybe there's more. Now, maybe I don't always see them. I'll deal with some of those problems in a second. But I just wanted to say, sometimes you get it most clearly at the extremes. When someone gets up and talks about something so obvious and so sick. The Holocaust. Could you really be a moral relativist about the Holocaust? I don't agree with the Nazis putting all those Jews in gas chambers and killing them, but, you know, that's their truth and that's their moral and that was right for them. You're an idiot if you say that. You're a historical fool. I'm sorry, there's no two ways about it. Okay? So I think we just found a couple of moral absolutes, a couple of real morals. Now the old atheists, thanks Ian, that's commitment. The old atheists were relativists. For example, here's a guy called J.L. Mackie, a Melbourne-born philosopher, went off to Oxford, very, very bright boy, an atheist, and he said this: if there are objective values, they make the existence of a God, notice his small g there, more probable than it would have been without them. Thus we have a defensible argument from morality to the existence of God. And that's what I'm going to argue today. Let me give it to you really simple right up front. I'm going to argue this. There are objective morals. You can't get objective morals from any other source, and we'll look at a few, but you can get them from God. Therefore, it's more likely that there's a God. That's what I'm going to argue today, okay? There are objective morals. You can't get them from anywhere else. That makes it much more likely that you should believe that there's a God. So that's in a summary what we're going to talk about for the next little while. And then I hope to get time for question and answer and comment and all that. Okay, now, the problems for a relativist, someone who doesn't believe in moral relativism, is, first one's logic. If you say to me, there are no moral truths, I'm going to say to you what? Including that one? Because what you've just told me there is a moral truth, but you're saying that there aren't any. If that made your head hurt, think of it like this. If I stood up this morning and said, all men are liars, you'd go, but you're a man. Are you lying about that as well? And so there's kind of a logic that bites itself on the foot, shoots itself in the foot. There are no moral truths, excepting this one, that there are no moral truths. So there's a logic problem. Secondly, there are some actions that you just couldn't condemn if you're a moral relativist. You'd have to say, well, the Nazis were acting within their own moral framework, and while I disagree with it and don't like it very much, that was okay for them. I'm arguing tolerance has limits, non-judgmentalism has limits, and cultural differences don't really relativize morality. Had a funny conversation with my daughter's school friend's father the other day. He's an Indian gentleman, brilliant IT guy. Our daughters are mates, we've kind of palled up a bit at different functions. You stand there at these school functions and you talk. And he said, so you're a Christian? I said, yep. He said, you know what? Our moralities aren't all that different. He said, people think we have very, very different moralities. He said, I won't eat a cow. And you will. He doesn't know me very well, right? Yes, I won't eat a cow, but that's for a different reason. He said Hindus, we won't eat a cow, Christians will eat a cow. And people think that shows that morality is so different all around the world. But he said, when you think about it, it really doesn't. Because the reason I don't eat a cow is because I think it may contain the reincarnated soul of a person. And so I might effectively be eating my grandma, killing and eating grandma. And I said, yeah, no, I agree with you. I don't believe in killing and eating grandma either. And so in actual fact, just wanted you to know that. And so in actual fact, we don't disagree on the morality. We disagree on the worldview. I don't think my grandma's soul is in a beef burger, or in the cow that made it. That's not my reason. I got other reasons. But if I did, so I disagree with his worldview, but I don't agree with his take two. I disagree with his worldview, but I don't disagree with his morality. And so in a sense, yes, cultural differences do obviously make some difference, but they don't really totally relativize everything. They don't turn everything just to rubber, right? There are still some hard and fast rules. And how can a society agree on morals if all we can say is you have that moral preference, I have this moral preference? There's got to be some way that we can make laws to govern all of us. The new atheists, I'm pleased to see, many of them are objectivists. For example, Sam Harris has written the most influential book on this recently. I interviewed him. Strikes me as a very nice human being. He says this, I am not at all a moral relativist. I think it's quite common among religious people to believe that atheism entails moral relativism. I think there's an absolute right and wrong. I think honour killing, for example, is unambiguously wrong. You can use the word evil. And he calls moral relativism nonsensical. I just argue that it has some logical problems, right? And the questions of right and wrong are really questions about the happiness and suffering of sentient creatures. So any creature that has feelings, Sam Harris cares about its suffering. Great. That's not a bad start. Sounds a bit like Jesus saying, love your neighbour. And there's a few little interesting clues in the Bible that God seems to care about animal suffering as well. Because doesn't Jesus say, God notices when what? A sparrow falls. And then he says, and all the hairs of your head are numbered. I love that one too. God goes, 0 for some of us. Then you've got Kai Nielsen, an atheist, saying it's more reasonable to believe some things like wife beating and child abuse are evil than to believe any skeptical theory that tells us we cannot know or reasonably believe any of these things to be evil. Great, love it. Find those guys very, very moral people. Don't always agree with every moral detail, but I find Sam Harris to be a moral voice in the atheist movement, right? Really like him. The problem for moral objectivists like me, for realists, is this. We're often misheard, especially if we're religious. And Christopher Hitchens, an atheist, a witty, brilliant atheist who passed away recently. I miss him for all his grumpy brilliance, even though I disagree with him. He says this, name one ethical statement made or one ethical action performed by a believer that could not have been uttered or done by a non-believer. And he thinks that's arguing against Christian morality. I actually agree with him. I think just about anything I'm capable of doing that's good as a Christian can also be done by an atheist. They can love their neighbour. They can give to charity. They can do kindness in all kinds of different ways, and they often do. That's not the point. Even the Bible admits that. The Gentiles non-believers, who do not have the law, the teaching of God's word, can instinctively do what the law requires. They show that the law is written on their hearts. And their own conscience bears witness to that as well, says Paul. And there's a bunch of other places where you could find that. Jesus says it. Even the Gentiles know how to be good to their family members. So what? Nothing special about you. Don't pride yourself that just because you're nice to your kids, you're any better than anybody else. Right? So the Bible doesn't claim that. And I'm not saying, I want to jump up and down and say this, I'm not saying believers in God are more moral than atheists. That is not the argument. That is not the point. I actually don't think that's true. Why? Because the Bible and Jesus spend a lot of their time attacking the moral failings of people like me, especially people like me. Religious intellectuals cop it worst from Jesus, right? That scares me, it makes me tremble, seriously. And it's, and that's good. I want to be morally sensitive. I want to be more morally sensitive than I am. I think Jesus tries to produce that in us, but while at the same time assuring us of his love and grace to faulty people. It's a brilliant combination. I'm not saying believers in God are more moral than atheists. And we're often misheard as saying that. I think we have to be very careful in making this case that we don't claim we're better than anybody else, or it just turns into a big argument of, I'm better than you, which is vomitous and really repulsive. Secondly, who lives up to their own morals? If I asked for a show of hands this morning of who perfectly lives up to all the moral precepts that they have, my hand wouldn't go up. Okay? I often disappoint myself morally. I really do. I often think, you knew that and you did that. And I hope I'm not making excuses for that. That's what the gospel's for, right? Jesus is a friend of sinners. But I'm not at the same time trying to just say, oh, well, whatever. I want to step up in those areas. But I'm not about to put my hand up and say, I live up to my morality. But that doesn't counter-argue this. You can still believe there is perfect morality, even if you don't see it perfectly. I can still believe there is such a thing as a colour scale, even if I'm colourblind. I can believe there's such a thing as perfect focus, even if I need glasses. I can believe in Beethoven, even if I'm deaf, right? And so you have, that's not a counter-argument to this point. And also, no one sees all moral truth. I'd be the first to admit there are so many areas that you could say to me, what do you think about the medical ethics of this? And I'd say, I know nothing. Only what I've read in the paper. No one sees all moral truth, and many issues are very, very morally complex. Because sometimes people say, well, if you think there's such a thing as objective morals, you tell me the answer to this moral question. And the answer often is, I don't know. That still doesn't prove that there aren't objective morals. Yes, culture makes some difference. No question about that. Take Sabbath keeping as an example of that. Adventists do that very differently around the world, and it seems to, there are some things that culture seems to make a difference in. And also, some would say moral laws can seem a bit soft compared with the laws of physics or something. Fair comment. But I still think they're there. And if you think they're there, if you think the Holocaust is morally, reprehensible, if you think child abuse is absolutely always, at all times, in all cultures, wrong, and you believe in objective morals, here's the next question. Where do we get them from? Now, most people think we got them from society. That's the most common answer I get when I talk about this. Here's an old atheist, Bertrand Russell, saying the whole subject of ethics arises from the pressure of the community on the individual. And that's partly true. But, I think one of the reasons I'm meant to be moral is to love my neighbour, to care about you and to work well in a society together. Yep, that's part of the truth. But I don't think it's enough. And here's a Christian, Richard Swinburne, saying societies that help each other, defend against predators, divide tasks, may well be more likely to survive than those who don't. Yeah, so in a way, looking after my neighbour is looking after myself. But, a lot of the things we've agreed upon as a society are not really moral absolutes. For example, if you stop at a red light, now we all know that a red light means stop, a green light means go, and an orange light means go like heck because in a minute you'll have to stop, right? No, it shouldn't mean that. But we all know those symbols. But is there anything eternally true about red means stop? No. We could have decided it differently. I don't know who made that decision, but they could have decided that green meant stop and red meant go, and then that would have had totally different meanings. That's not a moral absolute. But it's still useful to our society. So my point is, it's possible for a society to do useful things that aren't moral absolutes. And maybe a society may not find that. The other problem with the society argument is this. You really better pick which society you base your morals on. You really better choose carefully what one you're going to do. If you want to choose ancient Rome, you're going to get some morality in that picture that is chilling. And yet some artist has sat down and wanted to immortalize child abuse on the side of a vase. What was wrong with that nation? Did they not realize what this stuff does to kids? And so, and then we all admire those people who can stand up to a society and say, hang on, your morality's wrong, you're racist, for example. Someone like that, someone like that, someone like that. We all admire those kind of people and say, good for you, standing up to a whole society. So we can't really believe that society always gets it right and is a reliable source of morality. And some will say, oh, one society shouldn't judge another. But I think we admire people who say to another whole society, nope, you're wrong. What you're doing is wrong. It's wrong to invade Poland against treaties. It's wrong to start killing the Jews and whatever else you're up to, Mr. Hitler. And we're going to take you on and stop you. We admire people who question the morality of a whole society. And here's the other problem. The other problem is what biologists call the sneaky B-word move. Society can't really motivate me to love my neighbor. It can only motivate me to look like I am. Because how society works is, I'm going to pick on my friend Mike here, who I do really love, despite what I'm about to say. Why should I care about Mike? Well, because we're in a society together, and if I'm nice to his wife and kids, maybe he'll be nice to mine. If I don't steal his stuff, maybe he won't steal mine. And we'll be safer and more relaxed in that way. But if I'm really smart, if I find a way where Mike is weak or stupid and I can take his stuff without any threat, or he's left his door open and I can do it while he's away, why wouldn't I do it? It advantages me, it disadvantages him, but he doesn't know that I'm ripping him off, so who cares? He's still going to think I'm a good neighbor and be nice to me, and I've got some of his stuff. That would only be logical. And that's what society can't motivate me to do. It can motivate me to look like I love my neighbor, but it can't really deeply motivate me to care about him. It's not enough. And to put it in crudely biological terms, there's a sneaky B-word move that biologists talk about where if, this is horrendous and insulting, Matt, and I hope you don't mind my putting it on you. If I can get his wife pregnant and make him take care of my offspring, I've pulled off a real coup. Are we still mates? Good, okay. Because what I've done is, my genes have survived and he's paid for it, right? Ha ha, what an idiot, And I'm gloating about this stuff. That's what biologists call the sneaky move. And it's fairly common in the animal kingdom. While daddy penguin's away, mummy penguin might have some other lovers because they bring rocks and help her protect the nest and all this kind of stuff. And then they look after her and she gets some advantages out of it and yada, 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 right? So in a sense, society isn't really enough to motivate moral behavior. What about the individual? Can the individual give moral values? Well, yes, to a degree. But am I the only person in the room who wouldn't like to be my own moral authority? Am I the only person in the room who's ever done something and then a day later or a year later gone, oh, I shouldn't have done that, I didn't get that this, I wish I'd known that, I wish I'd had more self-control, I wish I'd blah, 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 I wish I hadn't been so self-centered. It's a pretty common experience. In fact, to be honest with you, I'm waiting for a decade of my life where I can look back and say, man, I was wise in that decade. Right? Hasn't happened yet. Maybe in my 90s. I'm hopeful. But the point is, I don't really want to be my own moral. Yes, don't get me wrong. I think it's up to the individual to think these things through and to be your own priest and your own moral arbiter, in a sense. But I think you need help with that to reveal your blind spots and to point out to you the natural biases and foolishness that we all have. Despite what this guy said about our inner voice, he would explain it as the inner voice of our parents. We've had so many years of our parents telling us what to do that we kind of internalize that, and that explains our superego. There's a spiritual explanation for that, and that is that we have a conscience, and each one of us carries around in some sense, God's voice within us, trying to speak to us, whether we listen or not. Here's the final one. Can biology give us objective morals? This gentleman, Richard Dawkins, probably the Pope of atheism, says this: we are survival machines, robot vehicles blindly programmed to preserve the selfish molecules known as genes. In his classic book, The Selfish Gene, Let me put it to you really simply. What he says is this. Our genes are what matters. And our selfish gene wants to stay alive, and so it uses our body, us, to keep it alive. And that's the basis of just about all of his thinking about morality. He says, this sounds savagely cruel, but as we'll see, nature is not cruel, only pitilessly indifferent. It's one of the hardest lessons for humans to learn. We cannot admit that things might be neither good nor evil, neither cruel nor kind, but simply callous, indifferent to suffering, lacking all purpose. There are occasions when genes maximize their selfish welfare at their level by programming unselfish cooperation or even self-sacrifice by the organism, that's you, at its level. But group welfare is always a fortuitous consequence, not a primary drive. If that didn't make sense, what he's saying is sometimes genes survive by making you die, but if that makes you be nice to your neighbor, that's not what the genes were after. They were just after their own survival. Let me break that down for you. So long as DNA is passed on, it doesn't matter who or what gets hurt in the process. Genes don't care about suffering because they don't care about anything. He says, if the universe were just electrons and genes, meaningless tragedies are exactly what we would expect, along with equally meaningless good fortune. Such a universe would be neither evil nor good intention. It would manifest no intentions of any kind. In a universe of blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt, other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason in it, nor any justice. The universe we observe, famous quote, has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. DNA neither knows nor cares. DNA just is, and we dance to its music. You hear what he's saying there? Your DNA is driving everything. There's no rules. It's just about survival. And I guess if you look at that picture, what's going on? Is that a terrible murder of one fish by another, a hideously immoral thing, as the smaller fish would say? Or is it just lunch, as the bigger fish would argue? Hard to say. Let me just simplify this right down. There are 4 reasons that Richard Dawkins gives for why I might care about my neighbor. And I'm going to pick on Mike again, okay? Genetic kinship. I would care about Mike if he was my brother or half-brother because we'd share some genes. I might even stop a bullet for him if that was the case, because if I stopped that bullet, maybe my genes would survive in him. And that's what my genes are programmed to do. If he's my child, I'd definitely stop a bullet for him because he'll take my genes into the next generation. Okay? But he's not. We have no family ties, so that one doesn't make me want to care about you. Mike? The second one is reciprocation. I might care for Mike if he would care for me. If he's got a ski boat and summer's coming, I might be very careful about what he wants, right? But if he doesn't, if he's poor or weak or needy or never going to be useful to me again, I wouldn't care about him. Number 3, reputation. If you see me care about my mate Mike, you might say, man, that Grenville's such a nice guy. Up would go my reputation, up would go the reputation of my children, and that helps them survive. So I might do it for that. But what about in private? What about when nobody's looking? I wouldn't care. Wouldn't care about him one bit. And for all of some spectacular stunts of charity that we can do, the real hard work of charity is done when the cameras are off and nobody's looking. So anyway, that one doesn't work to make me really care about my neighbor. Advertising, that's a funny one too. The theory here goes that if people see me spending my amazing resources, they'll think, wow, what a guy. He's got so much unbelievable energy and money. He's incredible. He can even waste it on a loser like... Sorry. But that's the theory, right? I'm not saying this at all. Lucky he's laughing. But he can even waste it on him. What an incredible guy. What an incredible mate he would be. I just want to go and breed with him. Seriously, that's what this theory argues. Sounds pretty crazy to me. I'm going to suggest to you that none of that would work. If you take the example, moving off picking on Mike for a minute, for a trafficked child in Thailand, what is it that's going to make me care about that little girl? Is it genetic kinship? Nope, not related to her. Not even close. Is it reciprocation? Seriously? Is it likely that she's going to invent a cure for cancer or become my favorite pop star or some amazing sports person I love watching? No. It's very unlikely that she will really pay me back at all. Reputation? Yeah, maybe. But what about genuine giving when there's no publicity for it? It's not going to motivate me to do that. And as far as advertising goes, I just don't think that makes sense. If 2 twins walked into a nightclub in Brisbane tonight and one of them said, I just gave $150,000 to charity, and the other one said, I've got a $150,000 Ferrari parked out the front. Which one's more likely to get the opportunity to breed? Okay, if you can put it in those crass terms, the theory just seems to fall over, right? And so Jesus, by the way, has thought of a couple of those things. He says, if you're kind only to your brothers, what have you done more than anyone else? Don't even the heathen do that? So he's talking about genetic kinship. It's not enough, he's saying. And he says, be careful not to do your acts of righteousness in front of people to be noticed by them. Because if you do, you'll have no reward from your Father in heaven. So he's talking about all the advertising and all the showy side to giving. And he's saying it's not what really motivates good, loving, human generosity. We'll skip that section just for lack of time. But I'm just going to argue that morality doesn't give you a solid base, that biology isn't enough to give you a basis for morality. Quick illustration. Who said this? The greatest happiness is to scatter your enemy, to drive him before you, to see his cities reduced to ashes, to see those who love him shrouded in tears, and to gather into your bosom his wives and daughters. Who said that? Mahatma Gandhi? No. Genghis Khan. Okay? Incredible warlord. And we went to make a film about him. Did you know that a recent genetic study found that he's the ancestor of 8% of the men alive today in a large part of Asia, which makes him dad to 0.5% of the people in the world today. Unbelievable. Talk about a successful gene. Talk about survival of the fittest. He's the poster boy for reproduction. Okay? His genes are just the ultimate in survival. And yet look how he did it. And in a way, there's the problem. If that's what you have to do to spread your genes that successfully, basically mass rape of princesses and noble women and any woman he came across, he and his sons had thousands in their harem, grabbed whoever they want against their will. Rape was his major survival strategy. Think of the morality of that. Not to mention killing and all that kind of stuff. So in other words, it just makes you question the whole biological thing. Is biology enough to explain morality? If the best biological survivor ever was a mass rapist, it just shoots the whole theory down. And it makes you say, well, there's got to be another source of morality, and here it comes, God. Now, as soon as you say that to most people, they're going to say, yeah, sure, God. God causes morality. Look at that. That's not morality. That's hideous immorality in the name of God. And yes, it is. To put it simply, I think we just need to choose the right God and understand what he's really saying. We need to choose a God who is fair and kind and gracious, not a God who inspires that. You better decide which God. You better admit too that some religious communities have acted worse than their worldview dictates. I admit that. You better admit too that some atheists have acted better than their worldview dictates. They don't have a more big intellectual basis for it. They just do it because they somehow know that it feels great to be kind and generous to a neighbor. But it's dumb biology. It makes you less likely to survive. You've just wasted some resources. I've just wasted resources I should be spending on my genes, on him and his genes. Ooh, that's not smart. But somehow we know that it is. Paul Cappan puts it in more complex terms than that. You can perhaps read him later. I'll just leave the name up. Paul Cappan, a Christian philosopher. And he basically says, how do you start in a universe where there's just stuff and matter and evolve people who somehow get moral and then they somehow get values? How does that even work? How do we move from a universe that originates with no prior matter into a universe of valueless matter and energy, eventually arriving at moral values, including human rights, human dignity and moral obligation? It's hard to see how the naturalist could bridge this chasm. I'm going to end with this thought. There's really only one reason why I'd care for Mike. And that is because I believe God made him, loves him, cares about him, wants him to be happy with him forever. And because he's also asked me to do that, and he will hold me accountable for how I do. And he'll reward me if I give to someone weaker, which Mike's not, or he'll look down on my actions if I've been selfish and unkind. I think that's the ultimate reason why I would care about another human being. Can it be misused? Yes, it can. Can it be ignored? Yes, it can. But I still think it's the only solid basis for objective morality. And there's even better news. We've talked a lot about the moral argument this morning, and I think that's a useful one in establishing for people evidence for God. But there's even better news, and that's the gospel. What that says is that however immoral I may have been in the past, that incredible moral God loves me, knows that I have a problem, and has suffered himself on the cross to allow my morality, his morality to become mine, his perfection to become mine, my imperfection to be covered by his goodness. That's even better news. But I'm just not sure people are going to get there. I'm not sure they're going to believe that until they've heard the first bit, until somebody has said to them, there's a reason why God has made a perfect moral law, because we couldn't have worked it out on our own. There's a reason why God carved the 10 Commandments, not just in dust, but in stone, because he wanted those principles to last through all of time, because they define what makes a good life, because they define who he is in a way. They're a transcript of his character, you might say. And I love the times when God writes in the Bible. He writes the 10 Commandments on stone because they're to live forever. And then Jesus writes the sin of a bunch of religious leaders, people like me, in the sand. But he writes it on sand because that can be wiped away. I just think that's a really important thing. His law is written on stone to last forever. It's written on human hearts to be handed on from generation to generation. But our guilt is only written on sand so that God can wipe it away. That's a beautiful idea. And so I guess in summary, I would say this. I think it's logical to believe in God as the ultimate source of morality and the one who motivates us to be moral and to care for our neighbours. That wouldn't be enough for me, though. I'd also need, in some way, to be able to qualify for that God's incredible moral requirements, and I don't, except through his grace and except through the cross. Looks like we've run out of time. Apologies. I do want to do some more Q&A. Hopefully tomorrow I'll be less long-winded, and we'll get to that. But thank you for your company, and I hope you have a great day. Let me pray with you before you head off. Father, thank you for revealing the truth to us when we were in darkness. Thank you for giving us these timeless moral principles that cause us to think and to care for our neighbours. I pray that we really would care for one another, not just in word, but in deed. I pray that in a room like this, on a camp like this, there'd be a whole bunch of Christians who love nothing more than to try to help one another and encourage one another and build one another up in faith. And I pray we'd take it beyond our own community. I pray that we'd have that sense of altruism and giving and practical love for other people, whether we're talking about financial needs or emotional needs or loneliness needs or needs for meaning and purpose and belief in truth and sense of a kind father. I pray that we'd be all about living kindly to others and living in a way that is ethical. And I thank you for the truth, the incredible truth that you are a friend of sinners, that you, the perfect moral God who's never had any shadow of darkness, can deal with our darkness. The one who's never even, who invented the law is able to love lawbreakers. That the one who was purity itself is able to understand our struggles and be a sympathetic and faithful high priest to us in the heavenly sanctuary today and be a friend of sinners and walk with us. That's the great news. So thank you. In Christ's name, amen.